You think your daily routine is demanding because you have to commute to work and answer emails? A single day in the life of an ancient Native American would physically and mentally destroy the average modern person within hours. While you struggle to wake up without 3 cups of coffee and panic when your phone battery dies, Native Americans began each day with survival tasks that required more skill, strength, and mental toughness than most people develop in a lifetime. Let's examine what a typical day actually looked like for someone whose survival depended entirely on their own skills, knowledge, and physical capabilities. No grocery stores, no emergency services, no safety nets of any kind. This isn't some romanticized vision of simple living in harmony with nature. This is the brutal reality of daily existence, when every decision could mean the difference between thriving and dying, when every skill had to be mastered to perfection, and when physical and mental demands would challenge modern athletes. Dawn arrives without alarm clocks or weather forecasts, but ancient Native Americans were already awake and assessing conditions that would determine the day's survival priorities. While modern people check their phones for weather updates, Native Americans read environmental signs that provided far more detailed and accurate information about immediate conditions and coming changes. The first hour after sunrise involved critical assessments that modern people never consider. Wind direction and strength indicated weather patterns and hunting conditions. Animal sounds revealed the presence or absence of game, potential dangers, and the general health of the local ecosystem. Plant appearances showed moisture levels, seasonal changes, and resource availability. These weren't casual observations. They were detailed environmental analyses that required cases. Knowledge most modern people couldn't acquire in years of study. Fire management began immediately, because maintaining heat and cooking capability was literally a matter of life and death. This wasn't turning up a thermostat, it was assessing fuel supplies, managing combustion for maximum efficiency, and planning heat needs for cooking, warmth, and tool-making throughout the day. Modern people who struggle to start a campfire would be helpless managing the complex fire systems that provided all heating and cooking energy. Water procurement started early, because dehydration could become life-threatening within hours, and safe drinking water wasn't available from a tap. Native Americans had to locate water sources, assess quality and safety, and transport adequate supplies for drinking, cooking, and washing. This required knowledge of hydrology, water purification techniques, and carrying systems that modern people completely lack. Food acquisition dominated much of the day and required skills that would challenge modern survival experts. Hunting wasn't recreational activity with expensive equipment and guided services. It was essential protein acquisition using handmade weapons and tracking skills that took decades to master. Every hunting expedition required understanding of animal behavior, weather conditions, terrain features, and safety considerations that could determine success or failure. Plant gathering required encyclopedic knowledge of local flora that modern botanists spend years studying. Native Americans had to identify dozens of edible plants, understand optimal harvesting times, know processing requirements, and distinguish between nutritious foods and poisonous lookalikes. A single mistake in plant identification could mean death from toxic consumption or missed nutrition opportunities. The botanical expertise required for safe plant gathering encompassed understanding of seasonal variations, geographical distributions, and processing techniques for hundreds of different species. Native Americans needed to recognize subtle differences between edible and poisonous plants that could look nearly identical to untrained eyes. They also had to understand which parts of plants were edible, when they reached optimal nutritional content, and how to process them to remove toxins or improve digestibility. Tool-making and maintenance occupied significant portions of most days because every implement required for survival had to be manufactured, repaired, or replaced using only natural materials and manual techniques. Modern people who struggled to change a tire would be completely helpless, creating and maintaining the dozens of specialized tools required for daily survival. Stone tool production required understanding of geology, physics, and manufacturing techniques that modern people find incredibly difficult to master. Pressure flaking, heat treatment, and edge maintenance demanded manual dexterity, technical knowledge, and patience that most modern people couldn't develop without years of dedicated practice. Weapon creation and maintenance involved sophisticated engineering, using natural materials to create implements that could kill large animals, provide personal protection, and serve multiple survival functions. Bow making required understanding of wood properties, tension calculations, and construction techniques that modern archery equipment manufacturers study and attempt to replicate. Clothing production and repair required textile skills that modern people have completely forgotten. Processing animal hides into usable leather involved chemistry knowledge, manual techniques, and time investments that modern people couldn't sustain. Sewing and garment construction used natural materials and hand techniques that created clothing more durable and functional than many modern synthetic alternatives. Food processing consumed hours of daily effort and required techniques that modern people consider incredibly labor-intensive. Meat processing involved butchering, preservation, and storage methods that maximized nutrition and prevented spoilage without refrigeration. Plant processing required grinding, cooking, and preparation techniques that made wild foods digestible and nutritious. Meat preservation techniques included smoking, drying, and fat rendering that could preserve protein sources for months without any artificial preservatives or refrigeration. The knowledge required to properly cure meat without spoilage involved understanding of moisture control, temperature management, and timing that prevented bacterial contamination while maintaining nutritional value. These preservation methods required constant attention and precise execution to avoid food poisoning that could be fatal. Butchering large animals required anatomical knowledge, tool skills, and efficient processing techniques that maximized usable material while minimizing waste. Every part of an animal had potential uses: bones for tools, hides for clothing, organs for food, and sinew for cordage. The processing knowledge required to transform a whole animal into usable materials represented sophisticated understanding of anatomy, material properties, and manufacturing techniques. Plant food processing often involved complex multi-step procedures that removed toxins, improved digestibility, or concentrated nutrition. Acorn processing required leaching bitter tannins through repeated water treatments that could take days to complete. Corn processing involved grinding, soaking, and cooking techniques that improved nutritional availability and created storable food products. Cooking required understanding of nutrition, food safety, and preparation techniques using only fire and natural materials. Recipe knowledge had to be memorized perfectly because mistakes could cause illness or waste precious food resources. Heat management for cooking required skills that modern people using gas stoves and ovens couldn't replicate. Shelter maintenance involved ongoing construction, repair, and improvement tasks that kept living spaces functional and comfortable. Modern people who call contractors for basic home repairs would be helpless maintaining structures using only hand tools and natural materials. Weather protection, insulation, and structural integrity all required constant attention and skilled labor. Medical knowledge and healthcare were personal responsibilities that required understanding of anatomy, plant medicines, and treatment techniques. Every adult had to serve as their own doctor, pharmacist, and emergency medical technician, using only natural remedies and traditional healing methods. Modern people who panic over minor injuries would be completely overwhelmed by medical situations that Native Americans handled routinely. Herbal medicine knowledge encompassed understanding of dozens of medicinal plants, their active compounds, proper dosages, and potential side effects. Native Americans had to identify plants that could treat infections, reduce inflammation, manage pain, stop bleeding, and address various health conditions using only natural pharmacology. This medical botanical knowledge required years of study and practical experience to master safely. Diagnostic skills included the ability to recognize symptoms, assess injury severity, and determine appropriate treatments without modern medical equipment or laboratory tests. Native Americans developed sophisticated understanding of anatomy, physiology, and disease processes that allowed them to provide effective healthcare using only observation, palpation, and traditional diagnostic techniques. Emergency medical procedures included wound care, bone setting, bleeding control, and trauma management that could save lives in situations where modern emergency services wouldn't be available. The medical knowledge required to treat serious injuries, infections, and health crises using only natural materials and traditional techniques often meant the difference between survival and death. Surgical knowledge included minor procedures like wound suturing, abscess drainage, and foreign object removal using tools crafted from natural materials. Some Native American groups even performed more complex procedures like trepanation and cataract removal with success rates that rivaled or exceeded contemporary European medical outcomes. Childcare and education happened continuously throughout daily activities rather than being separated into specialized institutions. Children learned survival skills through participation in adult activities, requiring teaching abilities and patience while accomplishing essential survival tasks. Modern parents who struggle with basic childcare would find the demands of raising children in survival conditions overwhelming. Social responsibilities included community maintenance, resource sharing, and group decision-making that affected everyone's survival. Leadership roles, conflict resolution, and cooperative labor required social skills and emotional intelligence that many modern people never develop. Community survival depended on interpersonal capabilities that modern individualistic society doesn't cultivate. Defense and security considerations required constant vigilance for threats from wild animals, environmental dangers, and potential human conflicts. Every adult had to maintain combat readiness and situational awareness that modern people in safe environments never experience. Personal security was an individual responsibility that required skills and mental preparation most modern people lack. Navigation and travel involved movement across terrain without roads, maps, or GPS devices using natural landmarks and environmental cues. Wayfinding skills required spatial intelligence, memory techniques, and environmental awareness that modern people dependent on electronic navigation couldn't replicate. Getting lost could mean death, making navigation skills absolutely critical. Landmark recognition and route memorization required the ability to identify and remember hundreds of natural features that could serve as navigational references across vast territories. Native Americans developed mental maps of enormous areas that included water sources, terrain features, seasonal landmarks, and safe travel routes that remained accurate across years of environmental changes. Celestial navigation techniques included understanding of star positions, sun angles, and moon phases that provided directional and temporal information during both day and night travel. This astronomical knowledge had to be combined with weather pattern recognition and seasonal variations to maintain accurate navigation across long distances and extended time periods. Dead reckoning skills allowed Native Americans to track their position and plan routes using distance estimation, direction maintenance, and terrain analysis that kept them oriented even when traveling through unfamiliar territory. These navigation techniques required mathematical thinking, spatial reasoning, and environmental observation that modern people rarely develop. Weather-based navigation included reading cloud formations, wind patterns, and atmospheric conditions that indicated geographical features, weather changes, and directional information. Native Americans could determine their location and predict weather changes using environmental signs that modern people with electronic weather forecasting couldn't interpret. Weather. Prediction and preparation required understanding of meteorological patterns using natural indicators rather than electronic forecasts. Native Americans had to predict weather changes hours or days in advance to prepare for storms, temperature extremes, or seasonal transitions that could become life-threatening. Modern people who check weather apps would be helpless without electronic forecasting. Resource management involved tracking and conserving materials needed for tools, food, medicine, and shelter throughout seasonal cycles. Inventory management, rationing decisions, and resource allocation required mathematical thinking and planning skills that considered complex variables and long-term needs. Modern people who struggle with personal budgeting would find resource management overwhelming. Seasonal preparation required months of advanced planning and preparation for changing conditions that would alter survival requirements. Food preservation, tool stockpiling, shelter winterization, and supply gathering had to be completed during optimal conditions to prepare for periods when resource acquisition would become difficult or impossible. Physical conditioning happened naturally through daily survival activities that required strength, endurance, and flexibility that modern people achieve only through dedicated exercise programs. Every day included climbing, lifting, carrying, walking, and manual labor that maintained physical fitness as a survival requirement rather than recreational choice. Mental conditioning developed through daily exposure to life or death decisions, environmental challenges, and survival pressures that created psychological resilience most modern people never experience. Stress management, decision-making under pressure, and emotional regulation were survival necessities rather than personal development goals. Skill development continued throughout life as survival techniques required constant practice and improvement. Toolmaking, hunting, gathering, and craft skills demanded ongoing learning and refinement that modern people rarely sustain beyond formal education. Mastery of survival skills was a lifelong pursuit rather than job training. Knowledge. Preservation required memorizing vast amounts of technical information without written records or external storage systems. Plant identification, tool techniques, navigation routes, and cultural practices had to be maintained through oral tradition and practical demonstration. Modern people who rely on Google for basic information would be helpless without electronic knowledge storage. Memory techniques included sophisticated mnemonic systems, storytelling methods, and practical repetition that could preserve complex technical information across generations without any written records. Native Americans developed memory palace techniques, narrative frameworks, and ceremonial practices that maintained accurate transmission of survival knowledge for thousands of years. Time management involved balancing immediate survival needs with long-term preparation and maintenance tasks. Priority decisions had to account for weather conditions, seasonal changes, resource availability, and community needs without external scheduling systems. Modern people who struggle with calendar management would find survival time management incredibly complex. Energy management required optimizing physical effort throughout the day to accomplish essential tasks while maintaining strength for unexpected demands. Fatigue management, work pacing, and activity scheduling had to account for nutritional limitations and physical demands that modern people with regular meals and climate control never experience. Risk assessment happened continuously as every activity involved potential dangers that could cause injury, illness, or death. Environmental hazards, animal threats, weather dangers, and tool safety required constant vigilance and decision-making that modern people in safe environments rarely develop. Risk management was a survival necessity rather than abstract planning. Problem-solving skills developed through daily encounters with technical challenges, resource limitations, and environmental obstacles that required creative solutions using only available materials and knowledge. Innovation and adaptation were survival necessities that modern people with manufactured solutions rarely experience. Communication skills included nonverbal observation, environmental interpretation, and social coordination that modern people dependent on electronic communication haven't developed. Reading body language, interpreting natural signs, and coordinating group activities without modern communication tools required interpersonal skills that many modern people lack. Emergency response capabilities had to be maintained for medical crises, weather emergencies, animal attacks, and accident situations without external help or modern emergency services. First aid knowledge, crisis management, and emergency preparation were personal responsibilities that modern people delegate to professional services. By the end of a typical day, ancient Native Americans had accomplished survival tasks that would exhaust, overwhelm, and probably kill most modern people within hours. Physical demands alone would challenge modern athletes, while mental requirements would overwhelm people accustomed to specialized jobs and external support systems. The skill requirements for a single day of Native American life exceeded what most modern people learn in years of education and career training. Technical knowledge, physical capabilities, mental resilience, and social skills all had to be maintained at levels that modern specialization makes unnecessary. Every day required decision-making capabilities, problem-solving skills, and personal responsibility that modern people protected by safety nets and support systems rarely develop. The psychological demands of daily survival would overwhelm people accustomed to external authorities and institutional support. The physical conditioning required for daily survival activities would challenge modern people who consider gym workouts demanding. Strength, endurance, flexibility, and coordination all had to be maintained through practical activities rather than recreational exercise. Mental toughness developed through daily exposure to life-threatening situations, resource limitations, and survival pressures would break modern people accustomed to comfort, convenience, and external problem-solving. Emotional resilience, stress management, and psychological adaptation were survival necessities rather than personal development goals. By now, you should realize that your daily routine of commuting, working at a desk, and checking social media represents an incredibly soft lifestyle compared to the demanding reality of actual survival. While you complain about traffic and meeting deadlines, ancient Native Americans faced daily challenges that would physically and mentally destroy most modern people. The next time you think modern life is stressful, remember that stress used to mean wondering whether you'd find enough food to survive another day, whether your shelter would protect you from deadly weather, and whether your skills were adequate to keep yourself and your family alive. Native Americans didn't have bad days at work. They had days when survival itself was uncertain, and they handled those challenges with capabilities that modern people can barely comprehend.